There's always a call to greatness. With anything in my life that starts out as stress, I can have the external circumstances traumatize me or evolve me.
That's Cy Wakeman, drama researcher, leadership consultant, and New York Times bestselling author.
And the more evolved you are, the more you can walk through the world unaffected. You can walk through the world with love and no reaction to unloving things.
I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer.
This is Jessica, head of coaching strategy at Crisp, and today we're revisiting one of our most popular episodes from the podcast, where I sat down with Cy Wakeman to discuss the difference between self-soothing and self-care, why overgiving can sometimes cause more harm than good, and how to evolve the way we practice gratitude.
We are so quick to name things that happen externally, good, bad. We name people idiots, jerks, geniuses if they think like us. We're so good at trying to name things. So what I tell people, if you want to improve your state of happiness, stop naming things too soon. Stay curious 1 minute longer.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. Cy Wakeman has made a career out of transforming toxic workplace cultures. She's known for cutting through the noise. And in her book, Life's Messy, Live Happy, she takes that clarity to a whole new level. I started our conversation by asking Cy what inspired her to write the book.
As with anything, it isn't a single event. It's been definitely a journey. I proposed a book called Reality-Based Living 10 years ago. Like, seriously, when my second book came out, Reality-Based Rules of the Workplace, I proposed reality-based living and just some rules for life. And at the time, people really wanted it to be work-focused. I think it's the work of the ego that we said, let's separate out personal development from professional development and don't skip genres in the publishing industry. When I present, people tell me that helped at work, but Cy, this has changed my life at home. So they were always translating what I was telling them and into their personal life. And they would always ask me, like, how did you learn this? Or they would hear snippets of my life. I think they always assumed my life was easy and good and, that I had it all handled. And they would hear snippets and they're like, wait a minute, how do you live so happy when even your life is so messy? And so I had pitched it. The publisher was like, no, let's stay in the business genre. Over the pandemic, as my life truly was kind of falling apart again, right? It was like when things fall apart, chaos is a fantastic fuel for growth. My publisher called and said, hey, people are really looking at well-being. Do you have anything? And I literally said, I do. And thank goodness I didn't write it 10 years ago because I wasn't ready. And I have so much more wisdom to share. So I wrote this book during the pandemic, and it was at a time that I found myself going back to my own roots as a counselor. People didn't want my business advice during the pandemic. They wanted my coaching on how to deliver healthcare when they're exhausted and how to work through grief and how to live in a world that had just gotten pretty crazy. So I
Yeah.
jumped in and wrote the book during the pandemic. That's how it came to be.
Wow. Yes. And I love, even from the very beginning of this book, you talk about the self imposed suffering. And I think that's something that the spectrum of suffering during COVID, of course, has been a wild ride for people. So several people on here might have not been at our 2021 Game Changer Summit. So I'd love for you to get them up to speed and tell me about self imposed suffering. So, what's your take on this?
Sure. Pain's inevitable. If we're going to be part of the human race, we are going to have loss and we're going to have things that don't go our way that we're disappointed in. And so pain is inevitable, but we extend pain outside of the current moment into suffering. And so suffering is often self imposed. It's definitely the work of the ego. We take the facts of a situation and we're the ones through our story. We add suffering. We see insult where there isn't any. We add suffering by going back into the past and then projecting out into the future. Um, I think many of us joined a religion of suffering when we were young, and I see us through so many forms of suffering. The ego is so good at suffering. We pre-suffer. It's like somebody will come to me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I was just thinking about next week and I'm just really worried about how it's gonna go, and I just imagine it's gonna be a disaster." And I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute. It's only Tuesday. And how are you today?" They're like, "I'm awesome." I'm like, "But so you had to go looking for suffering to next Tuesday?" And that's what the ego does. The ego tries to rob us of the present moment, which in the present moment, we always have everything we need, I promise. Like, and the ego is like, "Ooh, I'm feeling good." The ego stays alive by suffering. It's its job by eating anger for lunch, by staying mildly disgruntled, by keeping you the victim. So if in the present moment your life is okay, the ego goes either looking to the past to remember, or the ego goes looking to the future. So that's pre-suffering. A lot of people do post-suffering. I hear this a lot. They're like, with another wave of COVID, they're like, "Oh, this is going to be awful." Pre-suffering. We don't know. And then it may not be awful, but remember what we went through in March of 2020. And they go back and they
Yes.
post-suffer. And unfortunately, everybody is really good at group suffering. In fact, we don't like to suffer alone. If I see somebody on a Zoom call and they seem pretty happy, I'm like, well, obviously you haven't read the email yet. And I try and like destroy their suffering. Everyone out there listening, catch yourself. Notice when you see somebody happy and you're like, well, they must be ignorant of how bad things really are. Let me fill them in. So we resort to suffering, and I think we just unconsciously, we don't even know it, and then we wonder why we're not happy. I'm like, your natural state is happiness once the drama's gone. It's your natural state.
One thing with the projected, I often see team members will project suffering on others. So I think that the team is feeling this. And I'm like, has anyone told you that? So there's a lot of projection, not just on yourself, but also on others.
Yes, totally. And the projection and the suffering comes from a basic thing, just not questioning our own thinking. When the pandemic first hit and we had just millions of dollars of business just cancel in 2 weeks, it would have been easy to go into, like, I've lost my business, and in fact, I did. I'm like, 20 years, I'm so close to the end of my career, I've lost my business, and I had a lot of suffering around that. I'm like, it was all for naught, and, are we gonna get this back, and how are we gonna recover? And when I use self-reflection, what do I know for sure? I've lost my business? I didn't know that for sure. I knew that for a while, we had some business that was asking for a different date to present, or that it wouldn't be in person, that it might be virtual. And I kept asking myself, like, what do I know for sure? It's not that I've lost my business. That's a big suffering story. What I know for sure is there's people who are still calling me. And what I want to tend to is the question, what could I do to help? And it
Yes.
wasn't trying to nail you down to your contract, and it wasn't trying to say, "I'm gonna change my business and teach people, Zoom training." It was, "What can I do to help?" And 50% of my business is in healthcare, and they were reaching out from New York, from Philadelphia, from Washington, exhausted, and they didn't need my business advice. They needed way back when my counseling experience. And so I really started to just forget about I've lost my business and suffering and just in the moment answer what was needed. How can I help? And then what I started to be able to ask myself is what would great look like? If I were great right now, what would that look like? And I found something opposite and more true for myself. I didn't lose my business. I found my business. And my business, one for myself, was peacefulness in crisis. And my business was to administer to the people at hand. And it ended up being that word pivot, but it wasn't an intentional pivot. It was organic and viral and peaceful and not stressful. And I just started tending to people and then writing about it. And I built a community, Life's Messy, Live Happy. We got together once a month virtually. People just were able to really emerge from this crisis evolved, use it for a time of growth or not traumatized. And for me, I had to ask myself, I'm like, I was stranded for 3 months, no airport. I was stranded in Mexico. And I had to self-reflect. Like, I felt like a prisoner. There were militia on the beaches. We couldn't walk the beaches. We couldn't go out of our house. We were on total lockdown down here. And I felt like a prisoner, and then I had to question, am I a prisoner or am I on sabbatical? I could go through this as a prisoner or a monk, same experience, totally different. If somebody had said, "Si, you have 3 months, you have to go on sabbatical," I would have said, "I can't. I'm running a multi-million-dollar business. Everybody depends on me. I can't just go off to an ashram in India." And
Right.
turns out I could, and it
Yeah.
turned out for the better. And that's the illusion. A lot of the ego keeps you in, "I need time off to do self-care," and a lot of the ego is like, "No, you're indispensable and everything will fall apart if you are not here holding it together." The biggest thing I learned is that business happens with or without me. The universe goes forward with or without me. It was such a relief to find out I didn't quite play the role I thought I played in the hustle.
Yeah. No, that's so fascinating, and it is true, and when you say it that way, it is the ego. The ego is always like, "Oh, but they can't live without me," or "It's gonna happen this or that," and so one thing too that you touched on there was self-reflection, because now on this 3-month sabbatical that you say, you really were forced to self-reflect, and one thing that really stood out to me in your book was you said, you can't vet and self-reflect at the same time. And that really led into those three kind of questions for clarity. And so, can you unpack those questions a little bit more? And so, how you go into, what do I know for sure? How can I help? What would great look like? How did you kind of evolve to those being your questions?
It's not in a chapter in the book, is the topic of my TEDx talk. Like, there are these 3 questions that just kind of unwrapped me, and weirdly enough, like, they kind of found me in a variety of ways throughout my life, and now they become, like, my 3 questions that I try and walk with all the time. It's like 3 questions that will change your life. So, the first question I use a lot is, "What do I know for sure?" And that question is all about helping me break the trance I'm in with my ego, like to loosen my ego's grip around my world, because I'll see one thing and my ego adds all of this story and all of this suffering. And to break up with my view of the world when I'm wrapped in ego, I have to ask myself, like, what do I absolutely know for sure? And what happens then is the stress falls away because our stress comes from our story, not our reality. And most people that like blows their mind. But our stress comes from this story we make up about our reality. And so whenever I'm feeling stressed, one of my go-to strategies right now is to just self-reflect and say, what do I know for sure? So I may be telling myself the story that someone cut me off in traffic and they don't respect women and they attempted to kill me on the freeway. And basically, my commute was a challenge against death on the way to work. But if I really ask myself, what do I know for sure? All I know is that someone moved into my lane and allowed me less space than I prefer. That's all that happened.
Right.
Now, this isn't toxic positivity. This isn't like, "Oh, they screamed at me and it was, they just were trying to get me to listen." No, it's not an excuse for abuse. It's not it is a way of just loosening the ego's grip of your world. The ego sees everything as insult, everything is danger, everything's survival mode. And when you see things for how they really are, at least for me, I untap who I really am, and I'm a helper. Who I really am. My next question when I am not suffering is, what could I do right now that would help? Sometimes that's staying quiet. Sometimes it's maintaining boundaries and just letting you experience and learn what you're experiencing. But it's always staying non-judgmental and loving and really watching my boundaries. What can I do to help? I have to really watch that it's not over functioning and it's not controlling and it's not unrequested. How can I hold space and keep separate what's mine and what's theirs? Because what usually comes through in every situation is an opportunity for me not to just help, but for me to evolve. And so I go, what do I know for sure? Break up with the ego. What could I do in this moment that would be helpful? Sometimes it's not saying anything, it's just blessing them invisibly and going on my way. That helps in the moment, but there's always a call to greatness with anything in my life that starts out as stress. I can have the external circumstances traumatize me or evolve me. And that is where that third question is so important to me is as I'm helping, I want to ask myself like what is meant for me in this to evolve me. And so then that third question I ask is if I were my best self right now, if I were highly evolved, if I were great, if I were who I know I am already, what would I be doing? And that is how I can just elevate myself above all the right and wrong and blame. And my favorite quote is out beyond right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And it's like it really helps me unhook from, but I shouldn't do this because they weren't grateful. It helps me unhook and just say, who am I by nature? And how do I wanna walk through the world? And my book talks a lot about going inside and self-reflection so that you can forge wisdom, that you can evolve. And the more evolved you are, the more you can walk through the world unaffected. Like, you can walk through the world with love and no reaction to unloving things. And so those 3 questions I covered in one of the chapters, they're also my TED Talk. They're my 3 favorite questions. They'll set you free. Like, you'll no longer be
Yes,
tied
yes.
into other people's stuff.
I told you when we started, you are part of our onboarding and our process for everything. All new hires read your books right when they start. We just want to ingrain that from the very beginning. And so, really going into like, what do I know for sure? I think one thing, though, that you talk about in here is why do you think we naturally anticipate the worst? And why do we just build those stories up?
I think that we are just hardwired for, defense and, surveilling for danger. But I also think that we've overused the part of our brain that is ego, the mind. The ego is the part of our mind that is the most primitive part of our mind. And it has such limited options. It's like fight, flight, fawn, freeze. Like when we kind of, I call it toggling down, and we use the most primitive part of our mind, we are looking for what will kill us. And we're ignoring in that moment all the things that could please us. It's a survival technique. It's a way we toggle down. It's a way we resolve cognitive dissonance. It's really a defensive stature and we're wired for it. It's really up to us to not just toggle down to our most primitive nature. If you wanna live content in an imperfect world, need to get really masterful at moving into not just the lowest common denominator and moving through the world in the most unskilled way. You have to consciously be saying, "I'm gonna toggle up and use all of my intelligence, use all of my knowing." But you gotta practice that. You can't do that in the moment you need to if you haven't practiced that.
And speaking of practicing and the way that we're wired, one thing you really touch on in here is that practicing gratitude can rewire our brains. And I know you've went through different exercises with that, but what are your thoughts on that? And how did you really come to this conclusion?
When we were writing the book, I did not make an outline and I didn't write from like beginning to end. I would come up with like, what is something that I've learned. I didn't write this book for how you should live. I wrote this book how what I've learned helps me live. And so it kind of came up by topic, like, oh, if I were going to cover like some of my key truths for myself or my key learnings, what would they be? And gratitude came up on the list. And I'm like, I'm not writing about gratitude. It is an overdone topic. It seems so cliche, like toxic positivity, like be grateful. And it just kept coming and knocking at my door. Not only did I write about gratitude, but I wrote 2 chapters. I just couldn't stop writing about gratitude. And gratitude doesn't start with like, let me look at something that is causing me pain and suffering and just see it positively. That is not gratitude. The way that I talk about the 3 questions is you have to undo yourself before you can redo yourself. Like, you have to unpack and unlearn the ego's view of the world, see reality, and then you can move into gratitude. So, when I first was studying psychology way back when in college, like my first psychology class, they started to talk about the fact that we naturally see the negative, but you have to kind of be consciously seeing the positive to offset it. And so they started to talk about like if you can notice something positive, you can kind of rewire your brain. You can change your thinking where what you notice or pay attention to improves the quality of your life because you see more of that. Like you start to see more and more of that just by changing your attention. And so I started early on in my life to keep a gratitude list. And I'd write down at the end of the day, like things that I was grateful for. And one of the things I find with all of my self care practices is that routine and habit leaves room for the ego to come in and, like, morph my work. Like, you always have to be on the lookout for how the ego is kind of in a sophisticated way, like, quietly taken over. So I would make these lists and I became superstitious without really noticing it. I'd go through my day and I'd write down the things I was grateful for. And it became almost a list I was giving to the universe about things I preferred. Because what made my list that I was grateful for actually was just a list of things I liked. What didn't make my list were things I didn't like. So it was almost my ego going through my day going, "Okay, universe, more of this, less of that." My gratitude list became like a rating of what happened in my day instead of an appreciation of what happened in my day. So I then moved from instead of counting my blessings, I want to move to true gratitude is when I can count everything in my day as a blessing. And that's a whole different way of seeing. And so many people are into kind of like the prosperity, psychology or spirituality, where it's like, I want to manifest only positive. And you'll take a multidimensional, incredible experience of life and narrow it down to one dimension. And yeah, you can increase like during the pandemic, I had one candle and I love candles. And because I had one, I increased my appreciation, the value that candle played in my life. It was like I increased the appreciation by my focus and my care on that candle. I enjoyed that candle more than if I'd had 100 candles. It wasn't about prosperity. It was about the appreciation. So that's a good part of gratitude. But what I had to really start to do is I would think about my whole day. And then I would write a gratitude list. So I'd write the key milestones of my day and I would write a gratitude list. And I became very interested in the gap. Why didn't everything that happened make my gratitude list? Let's unpack that, right? Got a new client. That's an easy one. Gratitude list. Let's count that as a blessing. Lost a contract. Wow, that didn't make it on my gratitude list. How could it? What do I need to do to transmute losing a client and put it on my gratitude list? Could it be my teacher? What did I learn about how I could have worked with them differently? Where was maybe I unprepared? So, how can I be grateful that I lost that client today because I can really up my game in a lot of ways? How can I be grateful for the message? Sometimes we prematurely judge something and we don't have perspective. I
Oh,
tell a
yeah.
story in the book where I had this incredible client taking me and my family to Australia for a year, and they canceled at the last
Oh,
minute, and
yes.
I had basically farmed out my entire consulting business. I like had no clients and had rented my home and we're going to Australia and they canceled. Now, could I learn something from that? Yes, legally, have a better contract. I was a young consultant. Yeah. So did my contracting improve? Yes, for all of you lawyers out there. But also, if you would have asked me that month, could I be grateful for that? I honestly said no. But here's what happened. Another thing hard to be grateful for, both my mom and my sister were diagnosed with breast cancer within weeks of one another. By I think it was like 6 or 7 months later. Had I been in Australia, I could not have been home. I could not
Right.
have been there for them. After the fact, after my mom and my sister recovered, my mom ended up passing away, and I look at the time I had with my sister and my mother, I can see in retrospect how kind the universe was. So now if I can't transmute something from it happening to my gratitude list, I get suspicious that my perspective is too small. My mom used to say, "It's all good in the end, or it's not the end." Like, you just don't understand this. Then there's other things that are meant to evolve me, like big grief, relationships lost. It's hard to be grateful, for losing the love of your life. And I'm like, wait a minute. If you have a great relationship and you learn very little and it's easy to appreciate. But if you have a relationship that wasn't that great and it ends horribly, the self-learning and self-evolution that happens, the recentering, the questioning that pandemic brings to, am I living my best life? The great resignation is not a resignation, it's a reconsideration of, am I living my best life? So I totally changed the way I do gratitude, daily practice. It is not about my bargaining with the universe for more good. It is sitting in a peaceful place knowing it's all good. It is all good. It's here to evolve me, transform me, teach me, or bless me. And in the end, it's all good.
I love that. And one thing that really stood out too when you talked about the old Buddhist morality tale of is it good, is it bad, or who knows? And I loved that who knows because it allows us to remain open and curious. And so I just really loved that point within your book.
I love what you pick up in my book, Jessica. Like we are our minds sync. We are so quick to name things that happen externally. Good, bad. We name people idiots, jerks, geniuses if they think like us. Like we're so good at trying to name things. So what I tell people, if you want to improve your state of happiness, stop naming things too soon. Stay curious for external things 1 minute longer. My kids, when we were in Portland, we play this game called Homeless or Hipster. Now, it sounds like an insensitive game, but when you name things too soon, you can be wrong a lot. Because in Portland, sometimes the hipsters are dressing more, resembling that perhaps they don't have stability in their housing situation. And it's kind of a reminder to us that externally we name things too soon. And internally, we don't sit with our feelings until they tell us their name. We get a lot of information if we would go within and really work to name internal things. What is this feeling and what information does it have for me? But instead, we stay away from our feelings. We say disembodied and we identify that's the ego's work with the external world. So we name things too fast externally and it robs us of the experience. And then we're like, life isn't that meaningful. It's kind of boring. And we don't name things enough internally. So,
Yeah, it's like we try to make it so black and white without leaving that open door with it.
yeah, we want to master. We're good at mastery. We're not good at mystery.
Yes. Oh, that's a great point. Such a great point. And then one thing too, because I know you are also such a big reader, and going from gratitude and appreciation, one word that you greatly appreciate is the word and. And this one also really stood out to me. And I know we have a lot of working women who listen to this podcast who are so incredible. And I think one thing that you said, people would ask you, well, how do you run a business and have your children and raise them? And it's like, okay, well, there's different perspectives on the word and I can have and it doesn't have to be but or. Could you expand on that?
Well, I didn't realize, and as I was writing, these words came out. I have a whole section in the book on, like, meaningful words, words that either have found me or I'm, like, shocked with or, given or enough or and that have really changed my life. Like, just walking with a single word and reflecting on it and using it as a tool has completely changed my life, and is one of them. It's like this little tiny A-N-D. It's like a superpower. What I heard so much of is people would ask me that question, they would use "and," but what they're really implying was "or." Are you a mom or are you a working woman? And even me, I would be like, do I wanna keep this pace of working or do I wanna retire? And help me loosen and see a whole bigger perspective, but also be more self-compassionate and also not weaponize it. So, like, when people would ask me, like, "How would you work and raise kids?" The implication was either you have to have figured out a way to do it all, which isn't out there, or you're ignoring something in rotation. And for me, the word "and" brought these together. It's like, well, should I be successful in my career or be a great mom? And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not even the question. What if when I'm working, I focus on how I can enjoy my work? And when I'm with my kids, I can focus on how I enjoy my kids. What if it was not about how can you be one or the other, but my goal isn't even being a business owner or a mom? Like those are just roles. My true goal is enjoying my life. So I've used the word "and" to grow things beyond the limited situation I'm presented with. And so I started asking myself more about it's not should I retire or should I keep working? It's about how can I shape my work in a way that allows for some of those things today that I look forward in retirement. So and how can I work and travel more and have more space in my day and do it without, so much business travel? Like, when you start to add on "and," it's be careful that it's not like, "How do I do it all? How do I keep everything the same and just do more?" No. And asks you, how can you take what you have and do it peacefully and enjoyably? And so with my kids, it was like, how can I love the work I do and do it well and be the parent I wanna be with my kids and enjoy my kids? When I started softening up my questions, I just got so many moments of, insight. And I have such a funny story about that. When one of my boys was little, we were at, like, a church event, and one of the older women said to my youngest son, "Your mom sure is gone a lot. Don't you miss her when she's always on the road?" And my son said the politically correct thing. He's like, "Oh, yeah, sometimes I miss her, you know." And we get in the car and he goes, "Geez, doesn't she even know about Skype?" And it just cracked me up at the time because I would Skype them, and read books to them or like to him, he had only grown up with his mom, on Zoom. We didn't have Zoom then, but Skype. And he wasn't seeing it either or that you only get your mom when she's physically present. And that just really opened my eyes up to the power of "and."
I really love that, and I love one part in here too that you said it really fosters self-acceptance, and it really replaces the word "but." If you could expand on that part a little bit, I loved that.
I've quoted my mom a lot today, she must be on my mind. My mom used to say, "Cy, you are perfect, and you could stand some improvement." So many times if we hear a piece of feedback like, "You're not coming across as organized," we take it as the only thing we are. "Oh, I'm disorganized." So we either defend it and don't look at it and deny it, and it becomes our shadow side, or we go so deep into it. "Yes, I'm horrible, I stink, I probably shouldn't even own a business because 'cause I'm disorganized." And then we get really violent with ourselves. We're like, "I'm gonna stay up all night and make my list and get organized and, declutter this house." It's like, wow. What if you could just use the word "and" that, "You know what? I'm disorganized at times, and I'm organized, and I'm, enthusiastic, and sometimes I agree to more than is possible for me, and I don't value files as much as another person." And it's not justifying, but it helps us with our own acceptance. Like, we can be perfect and enough and incredible and have a place to grow next and have something we would like to explore next. The and just softens it all up so that we aren't one thing. We're so many things, and it's just a piece of feedback. And actually, any feedback that comes my way, I can find out how it's true. Cy, you're a liar. It's like, I know. Right now, my driver's license says I weigh 165 pounds. Like, I am a super duper liar. I have lied for 20 years on that driver's license. If you can be. And there are times I tell really brave truths. It rounds you out. It also helps me be compassionate to other people. Let's say that I get in somebody's car and there's a lot of stuff in there. And I can be like, oh my gosh, this person is like a messy person.
We'll pivot into now another word of yours, given. So I loved the word given in here as well. And it was kind of like, this is the reality. Let's accept this. So if you could expand on that word now.
So given is one of those words that helps me take what the ego's about to use as an excuse and just put it back into my reality to kind of radically accept it and put it back into the fold and see reality for how it really is and not go into wishful thinking, not go into victimhood. It just puts me back into play. Let me tell you, maybe give you an example. Like if somebody comes to me and let's say we're planning a dinner tonight and somebody says, well, the person who is going to help with the cooking is ill and isn't able to come in. So obviously we have to cancel. They're using what just happened to predetermine our outcome. And it's so tempting to go into like, well, that sucks. And what was me? And I had all this planned. And now I'm going to, lose this evening and everybody's calendar or extreme, like, oh, I have to do everything myself. It's not an excuse why you have to cancel. It doesn't mean dinner's going to stink. It doesn't mean I have to become a victim. If I just take this simple word and I go, given that we won't have Rose's help tonight with dinner preparations and we want to have a spectacular dinner, how could we? And so it's taking a disruptor that comes up and instead of using it as the reason why we can't, it's just simply like, oh, given this additional situation or new information, now how can we? And it keeps the energy away from why we can't, and it manages the energy towards how we could. And it may be, given this, how could we? We can simplify the menu. We can reach out for help. It doesn't automatically mean we're doomed. And a lot of people have reasons, stories, and excuses that come in first as just a change in their reality. But without using the word given, they're like, "Oh, well, then obviously we can't." And so we're so often doomed by what's happening before we've even explored, are there multiple ways forward?
Yeah, no, I love everything in here. I see the trends of like, it doesn't have to be good or bad. It doesn't have to be this or that. There's always something in the middle really to explore. And I think a lot of this has probably come also in being able to lead yourself. And I think it is actually a huge topic that we talk about with Crisp and our clients is you cannot lead others without leading yourself first. And I want your take on this of self-soothing versus self-care.
As the world health crisis hit and all the racial conversations, got amplified and escalated, thank goodness, we're all like stuck, with this world kind of seemingly falling apart. I heard so many people say, "Oh, mommy needs a glass of wine," or "I need a massage," or just even before the pandemic, working with many entrepreneurs, it was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna work my tail off and then go on a grand vacation." And it's like one day it kind of hit me. It's like, what if I just planned a life I didn't need a vacation from? Even a good thing like massage isn't always self care, and what people do a lot is they have pretty outrageous, like, lifestyles out of balance, and then they try and fix it with what I call self-soothing, and self-soothing is like, how can I numb or put on hold for a while or procrastinate? Like, how can I take a break before I go back to the same worlds that caused me pain? It's kind of how do I just numb myself And self-care is, how do I have daily habits and dedications that keep my energy supply, high, that keep me restored and renewed, not just soothed or numbed. And so it really hit me when during the pandemic and people were like, what was being revealed to some people was like, what's their relationship with solitude? And what's their relationship with uncertainty? And I was talking to a friend and who's also a meditator, and she said she was getting a lot of calls for people to learn to meditate now. And she goes, "Well, actually, kind of worst time to learn to meditate is like in a crisis." Like the meditators, those of us that have been meditating for years, had a good relationship with solitude and a good relationship with impermanence. And she was like, "This is why we practice. So when we need it, we're not blown off center." And she started talking about how people wanted to meditate to self-soothe, and that's why they didn't stick with it. But if meditation was part of self-care, that it was just a daily practice of unhooking from your ego, you were gonna have it made. So I really started to teach people the difference between self-soothing, which is I am exhausted and I wanna take a break, and self-care. So during the pandemic, much surprise to myself, I stopped all alcohol. Like, I was shocked by this. Like, it kind of stopped me. But what I found out is I would be like, I'm getting anxious. And so I want to have a glass of wine. And while that first wine feels good, it interferes with your sleep. It actually increases your anxiety. And so it was like, I had a stressful day. I'm going to have a glass of wine instead of spending time to catch up or unplug. It was like I just procrastinated. Now I'd wake up the next day with an even more stressful day because I didn't feel that good, and I was, like, procrastinating, and I just started to realize how many of the things I do were a way to escape my worlds, and instead of building a world I didn't need escape from. Now, a lot of your listeners are hustlers. They're gonna be like, "Oh, so I just have to not grow my business and I have to quit hustling." No, that's where "and" comes in. "And" brings in the innovation. The more balance and peace I have in my life, in fact, my mantra is, as the world picks up again, I will not go back to scheduling anything I cannot do peacefully. No more red eye. Am I capable of red eyes? Yes. Am I gonna do them? No. Bizarrely enough, since I have gotten so into self-care, when I do approach my work, it's so impactful and I'm so clear. My business during these times have grown and changed, and I sometimes have to call my team for a reality check. I'm only working a couple days a week. Like, "Are we good?" They're like, "No, the plan's working. We're all fine." I'm like, "But it doesn't feel, like, horrid." We are so conditioned that if we're succeeding, it's gonna feel pretty awful and we need a break from it, and we do these things that soothe, like Netflix binge, and so I would talk to people, and they're like, "I'm so tired all the time," and I'm like, "What are you doing when you come home from work?" You're like, "Well, I'm so exhausted." I kind of like, end up binging on Netflix. I'm like, "Do something really daring. Go to bed every night at 9, wake up every morning at 6." And I didn't realize how much I love routine and dedication because I was a jet setter. I was in 5 different cities, 5 days a week. I was in over 200 companies a year. I built a great business. I am not doing any of those things right now. My business is better. My health is better. I'm more clear. I'm able to set boundaries because I'm spending the time being clear. My team is really clear. We're all very calm. Life is good, but
Yeah.
it is self-care, not self-soothing. And so many of us run ourselves in the ground, then soothe ourselves, never fully restore, and then run ourselves in the ground and self-soothe. But
And I love, again, I always kind of pick out different nuggets in your chapters, but here you talked about appreciating the inhale and the exhale. So it's all sides of it.
it really is. It really is. And I realized, it was a funny chapter. I'm a breath holder. Like writing this book, I had to put into words. So I had to reflect so much because I had just a chapter to write a concept that was, my last books, I knew this stuff. It was knowing. I just wrote like what my research said. This book was all about reflecting. And what I realized is I am super good at muscling through. I am a resilient, strong person. I call it the breath holder. Like if I'm going to do something great, I hold my breath and I just go into it. I speak on stages in front of 10,000 people. But what I wasn't good at was the balance of the exhale. And I had this concept I wrote about the book, like the warrior is like they take the deep breath and go. But the healer, the restorer in this metaphor is the exhale. And so many of us are pretty good at holding our breath and getting through. I think that's what's attracted to CRISP. I think that's what's attracted to RBL, that we are unbalanced people. And you can actually, if you're a yoga practitioner, you can hold a hard pose longer by relaxing, not by bracing. And this is so counterintuitive.
It's so wired differently in our brains. Yeah. So I love too when you kind of talked about setting these boundaries with the way that you're like, I'm not going to take a red eye anymore. I'm only going to do things that I'm very intentional about. And so most of the people who listen to this podcast, they are lawyers. And most of them, a common reason for doing this is to help other people. But sometimes we may be generous for the wrong reason. So I love here when you said that true generosity is that which you can do joyfully and without expectation of payoff. And so can you dive into that?
A great question for people to ponder is like, what is my busyness keeping me from knowing? Because there are things in our life that we need to set boundaries with, or we need to know to do brave things. And when we don't get quiet and we have all this busyness, it keeps us from knowing some things. So I'm a really generous person. It is in my DNA. I have no shame about it. And it is my first inclination. It's just every personality test I take, I am a peacemaker, a helper. I love to love people up. Like I am really good at it. And as with all of the awesome strengths we're born with, the ego can use that best part of ourselves with motive. And so I started to realize that many times my generosity is without expectation of repayment. It is just, I have something extra. I would like to give it to you. It is like, I grew up in a big family. It's just like, if we share, we're all happier. And many times it is with motive, like, I want your approval, or I want your love, or I want your appreciation. And when it doesn't come, I get ticked, and that's how I know it wasn't generosity, it was overgiving, is when I do help somebody out and I'm like, they never even said thank you, or they did, but it wasn't quite a proper thank you, or they haven't reminded me multiple times how great I was to do that, or I gave them help and they didn't do what I told them to do, and I realized all of a sudden that, help can be the sunny side of control. It can really be, and Lamont, I think, was the first to say that it can be. I look at all these controlling people, and I'm like, "I'm nice. I don't control other people's lives." Oh, yes, I do. I control them through giving and overgiving, and a lot of times, I rob them of their own development. I give help before it's even requested. Somebody comes to me and they're like, "Gosh, I'm really struggling financially." And like, "Oh, I have plenty. Let me give you a loan." They never asked for that. And they're like, "Oh, okay." And then I'm like, they weren't grateful enough. And then like it sours our relationship because a lot of times we give so that we don't have to feel anxious about your situation. We give to be in mastery, not in mystery. Notice what your giving covers up in you and the anxiety. And for me, a lot of times giving was about wanting to be liked, wanting to be approved of, wanting to be seen. Like a lot of my generosity was I wanted to control how you saw me, that you never saw me as like selfish or unkind. But what happens is when we overgive, we abandon ourselves in order not to be abandoned by somebody else. And it usually leads to double abandonment.
Yeah.
Usually they don't stay prisoner. We abandon ourselves to not be abandoned by them. So when they're abandoned, then we're double abandoned. And
Yeah.
we do it to keep people in our lives to not be abandoned, and it never works out that way. And so I've wrote a chapter on generosity and the lessons I learned about overgiving.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you referenced the personality test and everything, as you know, we're really big on all of that here. And so I'm thinking in my head, the reasons you overgive might be for different reasons than someone here who maybe they just want to focus on winning and succeeding and achieving, and they might overgive because it's going to slow them down if they don't just fix that problem. And so there's different motives within that. And I guess with that, what sort of questions would you recommend someone asking themselves, regardless of their motive, but if they fear that they might be overgiving, what should they really reflect on?
I've had to really look at my giving from a lot of different ways. And so the first thing I asked myself as I was overgiving is like, truly, like, what's the state of my giving? Like, let's take a little inventory here. What have I given recently and what felt satisfying? What didn't feel satisfying? What do I just even notice about my own giving? And what was the environment where I tended to give, and was there pressure there? Was I seeking a motive? If I jumped in and did something for somebody else, like, what was the motive, and what did it co-create in my life? Like, how did it turn out? And I had to really look at, like, what was my underlying need in that moment? Was my need to just get crap done? Was my need to be liked? Was my need, to, like, look good in front of other people? That is the power question. So look at what I'm giving, and then look at in those moments that I was giving or I jumped in and saved the day, what was the underlying need? And if you don't identify that, like, what's my need? What are you so scared of if you wouldn't have jumped in and saved it? Right? So my need a lot of times is to look good in business, or my need is, I may say it's always to serve the client, but my need is for the client to never get upset. And then when I look at, like, how's that turn out, then I complain about clients who don't do their own stuff when I ask them to. And so that what's the need? Not losing a client, but what's the real outcome is I keep clients that are needy and not my favorite. And then I had to, really step in and say, like, what belief gets in the way of that? Like, if I don't do this, this will happen. What fear gets in the way of that? And it sounds bigger than it is. If you just start noticing when you overgive and why, it will just point you to where you need to evolve next. And so what I've started doing a lot is just taking a time out and going, you know what? I'm gonna get back to you in a few minutes with kind of a more thought out solution to that. So I just quit offering, or if I have a family member that maybe needs something, I say, you know what? Let's both take some time and think about what are some ways that maybe I could help, or that you could do some things differently, and come up with a solution, not a fix. And so, what I've done a lot with my own beliefs, though, is write down if I'm scared to say no, the worst thing that could happen, and then really see how likely that is. And if I can live with it, and then go the other way, like, what is the best thing that could happen, and live with that. So even if I give what I was intending on giving, I've at least am doing it more intentional. But I've had to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable, and the littlest things. Just last night, we're at a table, I dropped by visitor. I'm really looking to have some isolated time before I leave on a trip. Drop by visitor, ask in the midst of a crowd, "Hey, I wanna have dinner tomorrow night, and Cy, you're gonna come, right?" And my temptation would be like, "Uh-huh, sure," because I wanna be nice, I don't wanna miss out. I totally abandoned myself, and instead what I was able to say is, "You know what? I'm gonna let you know after I kind of make my list for the week, after I process some things tonight." And then the temptation still was like, "I have to go, I should go, like, everybody's gonna expect me to go, and I've turned down her last 3 invites, and she's gonna think I don't like her." And then I'm like, "Wait a
You've
minute,
built this
I don't
story.
wanna go.
Yeah.
I don't wanna go. What's the bottom line? I don't wanna go." And I wrote to her and I said, "Thank you for the wonderful invitation. I need to let you know that, I won't be able to attend tonight. And here's where you have work to do if you have to over explain, because I have this really big trip coming up, and I just had the boundary. Tonight's not good for me. Thank you." And if you can work on cleaning all this up, you won't be throwing pieces of yourself at everything, trying to control the world. you'll be a centered being in the world. And what that does is it leaves everybody else their own stuff and they evolve because you're not out there fixing everything. Now, I said to my therapist one time, I'm like, so I'm not supposed to fix anything? She goes, oh, no, Cy, you're in the business of a fixer. You fix stuff. She goes, here's your rule. If they're going to pay you premium price, then be their fixer, but don't do it for free. And I'm like, oh, so all you legal folks out there, all you lawyers, yeah, you get paid to fix people's problems.
Right.
Like, don't stop that. Just quit doing it in all those unpaid positions.
Yes.
You don't get paid to solve your employees' problems, but you do get paid to solve your clients' problems, right? And so I had to think, I'm like, but my whole career is fixing people's problems. My lawyer's like, or my counselor's like, easy rule. If they're paying you premium price, fix, enable them, do whatever you can. But if you're not getting paid, stop it.
I love that. That's a great perspective there. So this book was such a moment of self-reflection for you. And I just really, really appreciated the vulnerability, the things that you exposed within this book. And if for anyone who's listening right now to this conversation, if they could have just one takeaway, what would you suggest that be?
I would say my favorite quote right now is if you learn to trust yourself, you will know how to live. And that takeaway is stop connecting with the external world to really embody, follow your breath in, understand what you're feeling, understand when you're being thought and when you're thinking, like really spend some time with yourself and evolve yourself and get to know yourself and know your preferences and your desires and your limits. There's so much good information that happens when you get internal that you're not using. And so you're operating without good information most of your life. You're doing things the hard way.
I love that. That is so true. And I think everything, especially through this pandemic, through reflection, it's all about evolution and just continue to be the best version of yourself. Absolutely. And of course, as we come to a close, you know this question, what does being a game changer mean to you?
I think right now in my life, being a game changer means being an elder. And as an elder, talking without ego, vulnerably about this thing we have called the human condition and helping other people see that they are enough, they're doing enough. Success isn't the only defined by what we accumulate in life. And to be an elder, you have to be both a mentor and an intern at the same time. You have to be learning and being willing not to just impact the world, but to be impacted by the world. And so I'm working to move through the world. In my 40s, I had like lots of impact. And now I want to be impacted by the world so that what I bring to the world may have even bigger impact. And I think that is doing a lot more unlearning than learning and allowing a lot of things to fall apart and really forging wisdom internally so that we can move through the world with big love. And it sounds weird, but if I had to say in one word what a game changer is, it's love. Like there's so many ways to move backwards with hate or critique, but there's only one way to move forward, and it's really like loving. Like I want to love people up and then call them up. And I think that's what the game changer does. We love people up and we call people up. And I think we need a lot more of that in the world. Winning has gotten to be very one-dimensional. We've defined winning so narrowly. And I think I want to replace the word winning with fulfilling.
I hope you enjoyed revisiting this episode of the Game Changing Attorney podcast with our guest, Cy Wakeman, and have gained new insights from our timeless conversation. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that we can help you grow your law firm. Download the first chapter of Michael's book at gamechangingattorney.com. Shoot Michael a text at 404-531-7691 and he'll answer any question you've got for him. And leave this podcast a 5-star review so we can gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons here to you. For more information on our interview with Cy Wakeman, see the show notes for this episode in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.